"You want me to cancel our trip to Greece because of your chemo appointment?" Lauren said it like I'd asked her to reschedule a haircut. Not treatment, not something that left me shaking and hollow for days. Just an appointment. David didn't say a word. He just looked down at his phone like the table had suddenly become very interesting. For a second, the room felt off balance, like I'd missed a step on a staircase I'd climbed my whole life. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there holding the edge of the counter, trying to understand how something this serious could sound so small coming out of my own daughter's mouth. This wasn't confusion. It wasn't poor timing. It was a choice, and I could feel quietly and clearly that something between us had already begun to shift. My name is Janice Harper. I'm 74 years old, and until that moment I thought I understood my place in my daughter's life. I had asked her because I didn't think I had another option. The first round of chemotherapy was scheduled early the next morning at Northwestern Medicine in Chicago, and the instructions had been clear I shouldn't drive myself home afterward. The medication could make me dizzy, disoriented. I might not even remember the ride back. Lauren lived 20 minutes away. It seemed reasonable. It seemed like something a daughter would do without needing to be asked twice. But she didn't hesitate. "We've had this trip planned for months," she said, folding her arms. "Flights are non-refundable, Mom, and David already took time off work." David gave a small nod like he was confirming a business detail. No one looked at me. I remember noticing the way the kitchen light reflected off the granite countertop, how clean everything looked. There was a fruit bowl by the sink, apples I'd bought the week before. None of it felt connected to what I was hearing. "I'm not asking you to cancel the whole trip," I said carefully. "Just maybe push it back a couple of days. My first session is tomorrow. I don't know how I'll feel." Lauren sighed, not loudly, but enough for me to hear it, enough for me to understand. "It's just one appointment, Mom. They have those shuttle services, don't they? You've always been independent. You'll be fine. It's just one session, right? Independent." The word settled in the space between us like something permanent. If you've ever had a moment where something just didn't feel right, I'd really like to know where you're watching from. Sometimes I wonder if distance changes how we see things like this, or if it feels the same no matter where you are. I nodded because there didn't seem to be another response that would keep the moment from unraveling completely. "Of course," I said. "I'll figure something out." Lauren relaxed a little, like a problem had been resolved. "I knew you would," she said, reaching for her bag. "You're always so good at handling things." I stood there for a second, realizing how easy it had been for her to say no, and how hard it was for me to hear it. Handling things, that had always been my role, quietly, reliably, without making it anyone else's burden. They left a few minutes later. The front door closed with a soft click, and the house settled back into itself. I stood there for a while, listening to the silence that followed. Not heavy, not dramatic, just empty. I walked to the window and watched their car pull out of the driveway. Lauren adjusted her sunglasses before they turned the corner. It was such a small, ordinary gesture, something I'd seen her do 100 times before. I tried to match that image with what had just happened, and I couldn't. Back in the kitchen, I picked up my phone and scrolled through the discharge notes the doctor had given me. There it was again, in clear clinical language: arrange transportation. Do not drive yourself. Expect fatigue. Expect nausea. Expect confusion. I set the phone down and opened the cabinet where I kept my medications. The bottles were lined up neatly, labels facing forward. I'd always liked things organized. It gave me a sense of control even when the rest of life didn't cooperate. For a moment I considered calling someone else. A neighbor. Maybe Susan down the street. But then I pictured explaining it, asking for help, and something in me resisted. Not pride exactly, more like a habit I'd built over years of managing on my own. I closed the cabinet and leaned against it, feeling the cool wood at my back. Independent. The word came back sharper this time. I moved through the house slowly, almost methodically, as if there were a checklist I hadn't written down. I gathered the things I'd need for the morning: a sweater, because treatment rooms were always cold, a small bag with water crackers, the book I'd been trying to finish, practical things, manageable things. In the bedroom, I paused in front of the dresser. There was a photo of Lauren from years ago, maybe 8 or 9, standing in the backyard with a gap-toothed smile and a ribbon in her hair. I picked it up, running my thumb lightly over the frame. She had looked at me then like I was the answer to every question she didn't know how to ask yet. I set the photo back in its place. This was just one moment, I told myself. One misunderstanding. People got busy. Plans overlapped. Life moved in ways you couldn't always control. But the thought didn't settle the way it used to. I checked the time. If I was going to figure out transportation, I needed to do it soon. The appointment was at 8. That meant leaving before 7, accounting for traffic into the city. I walked back to the kitchen and picked up my phone again, opening the hospital's website. The shuttle service Lauren had mentioned was there, just as she'd said. A scheduled pickup shared with other patients. Early, efficient, impersonal. I hovered over the booking option for a moment, then set the phone down again. The house was quiet, in a way I hadn't noticed before. Not peaceful, just still. Like everything was waiting for something to begin. I took a slow breath and looked around the room one more time, trying to anchor myself in something familiar, before the morning came. I booked the shuttle just before dawn. The confirmation email came through in a clean, neutral tone: pickup at 6:20 a.m., front curb, be ready 10 minutes early. I set my phone down and stood there for a moment, letting the instructions settle into something I could follow. It was simple enough. Be ready. Be on time. Let someone else drive. I slept in short stretches, waking every hour to check the clock as if I might miss something important if I drifted too far. By the time the sky softened from black to a pale gray, I was already dressed. The sweater I'd laid out the night before felt heavier than I remembered. I folded it over my arm anyway and picked up the small bag from the kitchen counter. At 6:10, I stepped outside. The air was colder than I expected, sharp against my face. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before a neighborhood fully wakes. A porch light flickered on 2 houses down, then off again. Somewhere a car door shut, distant and muffled. I stood near the curb, watching the empty road. At 6:22, the shuttle pulled up. It wasn't marked in any obvious way, just a white van with tinted windows and a small logo near the door. The driver stepped out, a man in his 50s with a reflective vest and a clipboard tucked under his arm. "Janice Harper?" he asked. I nodded. "Morning," he said, checking my name off a list. "You're our second pickup. We've got a couple more stops before we head into the city." Second. I climbed into the van carefully, holding onto the handle a little longer than necessary. Inside, the seats were arranged in 2 rows. A woman sat near the window, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She gave me a small, polite smile as I settled in across from her. First time she asked. I hesitated, then nodded again. "Me too," she said. "I mean, with this particular round. I've been through it before." There was something steady in the way she said it, matter of fact, not comforting, not alarming, just true. "I'm Janice," I said. "Carol," she replied. The driver closed the door and we pulled away from the curb. We drove in silence for a while, stopping twice more to pick up other passengers. A man with a baseball cap who moved slowly, leaning heavily on the side of the van as he climbed in. Another woman younger than the rest of us who kept her headphones in and her eyes down. No one spoke much after that. The city came into view gradually, buildings rising out of the morning haze, traffic thickening as we got closer. I watched it all through the window, trying to stay focused on something outside myself. The rhythm of the road, the shifting light, the way everything seemed to move forward, whether you were ready or not. At the hospital, the driver helped us out one by one. "Same pickup spot this afternoon," he said. "Just check your discharge time with the desk." I thanked him and followed the others inside. Northwestern Medicine was brighter than I expected. Clean lines, polished floors, the faint scent of disinfectant layered over something softer coffee, maybe from a cafe somewhere down the hall. People moved with purpose, badges clipped neatly to their scrubs, voices low but efficient. I checked in at the front desk, gave my name, answered a few questions. The receptionist smiled the entire time, the kind of practiced smile that felt both reassuring and distant. "Take a seat," she said. "They'll call you shortly." The waiting area was already half full. I chose a chair near the wall and set my bag on the floor beside me. Across from me, a couple sat close together, their shoulders touching. The woman leaned into the man as he spoke quietly to her, his hand resting over hers. He nodded as she talked, listening in a way that felt complete. "I'm here. Don't worry. I'll wait." To my left, a young girl, maybe in her 20s, sat with her mother. They were flipping through a magazine together, pointing at something on the page and laughing softly. It wasn't loud or disruptive, just shared. I looked down at my hands. They were steady, which surprised me. I had expected something else shaking maybe, or a kind of visible fear. But what I felt was quieter than that. Not calm, exactly. More like a narrowing, as if everything unnecessary had stepped aside, leaving only what needed to be done. Janice Harper. I looked up. A nurse stood at the doorway, her expression warm but focused. "That's me," I said, standing. She led me down a hallway lined with identical doors, each one opening into a small treatment room. Mine had a reclining chair, a side table, and a machine that hummed softly in the corner. There was a window, but the blinds were only half open, letting in a thin slice of morning light. "Have you had chemo before?" she asked, checking something on a tablet. "No," I said. "All right. We'll walk you through everything," she replied. "If you feel anything unusual, dizziness, nausea, anything at all, just let me know." I nodded, taking in the room piece by piece. She helped me get settled, adjusted the chair, checked my vitals. Her movements were efficient, practiced. There was comfort in that, in the predictability of it. When the IV went in, I watched her hands rather than the needle. It was easier that way. "Okay," she said gently. "We're starting." The medication moved through the line, slowly clear at first, then slightly clouded as it entered my bloodstream. I leaned back in the chair, pulling the sweater around my shoulders. She had been right, it was cold. Time passed in a way that didn't quite register. Minutes stretched, then folded into something less defined. I tried to read, but the words slipped past me without settling. So I watched instead. People came and went. Nurses checking monitors, adjusting lines, offering water or a blanket. In the room across the hall, a man sat with his daughter who kept talking to him even when he closed his eyes, as if her voice alone could keep him anchored. At one point, Carol was wheeled past my doorway. She lifted her hand slightly when she saw me, a small acknowledgement like we were part of the same quiet understanding now. I lifted mine in return. There was a moment somewhere in the middle of it when the weight of everything pressed in just a little more than before. Not panic, not even fear in the way I had expected. Just the simple, undeniable awareness that I was here in this room going through something that had already begun to change me, and I was doing it alone. I adjusted the blanket over my lap, shifting slightly in the chair, as the machine continued its steady rhythm beside me. By the time they disconnected the IV, the room felt thinner, like something had been quietly taken out of it. The nurse, Nina, I remembered from the name on her badge, moved with the same calm precision, removing the line-pressing gauze against my arm, giving instructions in a voice that didn't rise or fall. "You might feel tired," she said. "Drink fluids, small meals if you can, and make sure you have a safe ride home." I nodded as if that part had already been solved. The hallway seemed longer on the way out. I held the strap of my bag close to my shoulder and walked carefully, measuring each step. At the front desk, I confirmed the shuttle pickup time, wrote it down, even though it had been texted to me. Writing it made it feel more certain. Outside, the air had warmed slightly, but it didn't reach me the same way. The driver recognized me and opened the van door before I reached it. "Afternoon pickup," he said. "How'd it go?" "Fine," I answered, because there wasn't a better word that would fit neatly into the space he'd offered. The ride back was quieter than the morning. Carol sat in the same seat, her head tilted toward the window. The man with the cap slept, his chin resting against his chest. The younger woman kept her headphones in, eyes closed. I leaned my head back and watched the ceiling of the van, letting the motion carry me. When we pulled up to my house, the driver helped me down again. "Next appointment's already scheduled?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "All right. See you then." I thanked him and walked up the short path to my front door. The key felt heavier in my hand than it had that morning. Inside the house was just as I'd left it. Everything in place, nothing changed. I set my bag on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment, unsure what to do next. The instructions had been clear: rest fluids, light food. I poured a glass of water and took a few slow sips, leaning against the counter for balance. The quiet was different now, not empty, just wider. I moved to the living room and lowered myself into the chair by the window, the same chair I'd sat in the night before, waiting for morning to come, only now the light had shifted, casting longer shadows across the floor. My phone buzzed on the side table. I reached for it without thinking, a notification from Facebook. For a second I considered ignoring it, letting it sit there unopened, but my thumb moved anyway, almost automatically tapping the screen. Lauren had posted a photo, Santorini, the blue domes, the white walls, the sea stretching out behind them in that unreal shade of deep, endless blue. She and David stood side by side, sunglasses on the sunlight catching in her hair. Her hand rested lightly on his arm, both of them smiling into the camera like everything was exactly where it should be. The caption was simple: family first, always. I stared at the words longer than I looked at the picture. Family first. The phrase settled somewhere deeper than the image itself. It didn't land all at once. It spread slowly, like something seeping into the spaces I hadn't thought to guard. I scrolled down. Comments filled the screen, friends, acquaintances, people I recognized by name more than by face. So beautiful goals. You two deserve this. Nothing better than family time. I read each one, not really taking them in, just letting them pass in front of me. The hearts, the exclamation points, the easy certainty of it all. Family first. I thought about the waiting room, the couple sitting close together, their shoulders touching, the young girl and her mother laughing softly over a magazine, the man across the hall with his daughter, her voice steady even when his eyes closed. I thought about the shuttle, the quiet understanding between strangers who had shown up for the same reason at the same hour in the same place. And then I thought about the kitchen yesterday afternoon. The way Lauren had said it, the way David hadn't looked up. It wasn't just the trip. That realization didn't come as a sudden shock. It unfolded piece by piece, fitting into places that had already been shaped for it. It wasn't just yesterday. It was the missed calls that had gone unanswered a little too long. The holidays that had been shortened, rearranged, or skipped entirely because something else had come up. The conversations that had shifted from sharing to updating, quick, efficient, as if we were exchanging information instead of time. It was the way I had adjusted without naming it, made things easier, made things flexible, filled in the gaps without asking why they were there. I looked back at the photo. Lauren's smile was the same one she'd had as a child, just more practiced now, more certain of the effect it had. Family first. The words felt different the second time. It didn't feel like a misunderstanding anymore. It felt like something I had been choosing not to see. I had told myself this was just one moment, but it didn't feel like one anymore. Not like a statement, more like a boundary. I set the phone down slowly, placing it face down on the table. For a moment, I just sat there listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the distant sound of a car passing on the street. If that's what family first looks like, what does it make this? If you saw that post, knowing what had happened this morning, what would you call it? I'm asking because I don't think there's just one answer. But stay with me, because this wasn't the only thing I would start to notice. I leaned back in the chair, closing my eyes briefly, not to sleep, but to steady the feeling that had begun to take shape. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even fully formed yet. But it was there. And it wasn't going away. I didn't pick the phone back up. The image stayed with me anyway, the curve of Lauren's smile, the easy way her hand rested on David's arm, the words beneath it like they belonged to a different story than the one I was living. I let my eyes close for a moment, and instead of the room, something older came into focus. The first time I held her, she fit entirely between my forearm and my chest. I remember that clearly. The nurse had placed her in my arms, and everything else, the monitors, the voices, the fluorescent lights, fell away. She was small, impossibly small, with a face that hadn't quite decided how to arrange itself yet. When she opened her eyes just briefly, there was something in the way she looked up that made the rest of the world feel negotiable. I had been 28 then, tired in a way that felt temporary, not permanent. Certain in the quiet, untested way you can only be before life begins asking harder questions. Her father left before she turned 2. There wasn't a dramatic moment, no single argument that explained it. It happened gradually, fewer conversations, more distance, and then one day a packed bag by the door and a promise to figure things out that never turned into anything solid. After that, it was just the two of us. I went back to work sooner than I would have liked. Nursing shifts that started before sunrise or ended long after dark. I learned to move through exhaustion with a kind of rhythm: wake up, get her dressed, drop her off work, pick her up, repeat. There wasn't much room for anything else, but there didn't need to be. She filled the space. Lauren wasn't a difficult child. That's something I used to say often. She didn't cry without reason. She adapted to new babysitters, to changing routines, to the constant adjustments that came with a life built around necessity. I remember evenings at the kitchen table, her small legs swinging under the chair as she colored while I sorted bills. "Why do people get sick?" she asked once. "Because bodies aren't perfect," I said. "Will you get sick?" "Not today." Back then, today was enough. There were sacrifices, but they didn't feel like sacrifices at the time. Just small, consistent choices. I stopped taking vacations. I worked extra shifts when they were available. I said no to anything that didn't fit into what we needed. I told myself it was temporary. There was a winter when the heating system failed. I remember layering blankets on her bed, tucking them around her like a barrier against the cold. She laughed, calling it a fort, and I let her believe that was what it was. The repair cost more than I could comfortably manage. "We'll make it work." So I took on additional hours at the hospital, trading sleep for something closer to stability. I don't remember resenting it. That's what stands out now. There wasn't a sense of loss attached to those choices. They were simply what needed to be done. On weekends, when I wasn't working, we kept things simple. Walks to the park, movies at home with popcorn made on the stove because it was cheaper that way. Birthdays were planned, carefully measured against what I could afford without putting something else at risk. She never asked for more than I could give, or maybe she did, and I just learned how to stretch things enough that it felt like enough. There were school events I made sure not to miss, recitals, presentations, small milestones that mattered more than they seemed from the outside. I would sit in those folding chairs, sometimes still in my scrubs, and watch her stand a little straighter when she spotted me. That look, recognition, relief stayed with me longer than anything else. I built everything around that, around being there, around making sure she didn't feel the absence of what we didn't have. If there was a gap, I filled it. If something broke, I fixed it. It wasn't about keeping score, it was about keeping things steady. There were nights when I sat at the edge of her bed after she'd fallen asleep, listening to the even rhythm of her breathing. The exhaustion would surface, then not overwhelming, just present. But even in that, there was a kind of certainty. We were moving forward. Together. I opened my eyes slowly, the present returning in pieces, the chair beneath me, the light in the room, the quiet of the house continuing as if nothing had shifted at all. For a long time I had understood our story in a single direction. Everything I did had been oriented toward one outcome: that she would be okay. I had never really asked what would happen after that, because in my mind the answer had always been simple. She would grow up, build a life of her own, and we would carry each other forward in a different way. Not the same as before, not as dependent, but still connected, present, available when it mattered. That was the version I held on to. Through high school, Lauren moved through things with a quiet confidence that made everything seem easier than it probably was. She did well in her classes, made friends without effort, learned how to navigate the world in ways I had taken years to understand. I watched it happen from the edges: early mornings, late nights, the spaces in between my shifts. There were college applications spread across the kitchen table one fall. Papers, brochures, deadlines written in careful ink. I sat with her going through each one, calculating what we could afford and what we might need to borrow. "You don't have to do all of this," she said once, glancing at the numbers. "I know," I replied, "but I want to." And I meant it. When the acceptance letter came, she stood in the doorway holding it eyes wide, not quite smiling yet. "You did it?" I said. She laughed then. "We did it." At the time, that felt true. College changed the rhythm of things. The calls became shorter. At first, they were regular every few days, then once a week. Quick updates, small questions, stories about classes and people I tried to keep track of. "Did you eat?" I'd ask. "Yes, Mom. I'm fine." Over time, something shifted. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. Less detail, more summary. "I'm busy this week. I'll call you later. I'll call you later, okay? Everything's good." I adjusted without thinking about it. I told myself it was part of growing up, that independence looked like distance from the outside, that if she needed me, she would say so. So I didn't push. When tuition bills came due, I paid what I could and found ways to cover the rest. Extra shifts again, less sleep. The same pattern, just in a different phase. She didn't ask how it worked, and I didn't offer the explanation. After graduation, she moved into a small apartment in the city. I helped her set it up, carrying boxes, assembling furniture, making sure the kitchen had the basics. "It's perfect," she said. "It's a start," I replied. We hugged, and for a moment it felt familiar, solid. But even then, something had begun to shift. It showed up in small ways. Plans that changed quietly. Invitations that came late or not at all. Holidays shortened because she had somewhere else to be. Not out of disregard, I told myself. Just life expanding. When she met David, she called to tell me after their third date. "He's different," she said. In a good way. I listened, asked what mattered. "He's steady," she said. "You'll like him." I did at first. He was polite, attentive in the way people are when they know they're being observed. There was nothing obviously wrong, nothing I could point to in a single moment, but there were small things I couldn't quite place, a tendency to let Lauren speak for both of them, decisions that seemed to pass through her even when they didn't need to. It wasn't alarming, just noticeable. They built a life together quickly, a better apartment, then a house. The kind of place with space for things that weren't strictly necessary, guest rooms, a larger kitchen, details that suggested a level of comfort I hadn't had at their age. I helped where I could. A check toward the down payment. Contributions when something unexpected came up. "You don't have to do this," Lauren would say sometimes. "I know," I'd answer. And again, I meant it. Visits became more structured, planned in advance, fitted between their schedules. When I came over, there were always things happening, calls to take errands, to run conversations that paused and resumed around other priorities. We still talked, but it wasn't the same kind of talking. Fewer questions about me, fewer moments where things slowed down, more updates, more movement. I noticed it the way you notice something slightly out of place in a room you know well, not enough to stop everything and question it, just enough to register. So I adapted. I stayed longer when I could. I offered help before it was asked for. I made sure to fit into whatever space was available. It didn't feel like being pushed out. Not at first. It felt like making room. Over time, that space became more defined. Calls went unanswered a little longer. Messages came back later in the day, sometimes the next. Still, I didn't name it. I told myself what I had always told myself. She's busy, she's building something, this is what it looks like. I held on to that version longer than I should have, until it began to look like something else. The next morning, the house felt heavier, not because anything had changed overnight, but because I had. The routine was the same: wake up, take the medication the doctor had prescribed, move carefully through the kitchen, but there was a new awareness underneath it all, like a thread I couldn't unsee once I'd noticed it. I had another appointment scheduled in a few days. Not treatment yet, just follow-up tests. Still early enough that I could manage most things on my own, or so I told myself. I made tea and carried it to the small table by the window, the same place I had sat the day before the shuttle, before the photo. The light came in at a slightly different angle, softer now, catching the edge of the glass. Halfway through the cup, there was a knock at the door. Not loud, just enough to be heard. I set the cup down and stood steadying myself before walking over. When I opened it, Susan Parker stood on the front step, a grocery bag balanced against her hip. "Morning, Janice." She said, her tone warm but careful, as if she were stepping into something she didn't want to disturb. "Susan?" I replied, a little surprised. "I didn't expect I was heading out anyway," she said quickly. "Thought I'd see if you needed anything." "I know you had your first treatment yesterday." I blinked, trying to place how she knew. Then I remembered mentioning it in passing a week earlier over the fence when we'd both been outside at the same time. I hadn't thought much of it then. "That's kind of you," I said. "I'm all right, really." She nodded but didn't leave. "Mind if I come in for a minute?" she asked. I stepped aside, gesturing toward the living room. Of course. She set the grocery bag on the kitchen counter, moving with an ease that suggested she had done this kind of thing before, not necessarily for me, but for someone. I picked up a few things she said. "Soup, some fruit, nothing fancy. You didn't have to do that." "I know," she replied, meeting my eyes briefly. I wanted to. There was no weight in the words, no expectation attached to them, just a simple statement. I nodded, not trusting myself to say more without making it into something larger than she had intended. We sat for a while in the living room, the conversation unfolding in small, manageable pieces. She asked how the treatment had gone. I told her it had been fine. She didn't press for details, just listened the way people do when they understand that not everything needs to be explained. "How are you getting to your next appointment?" she asked after a moment. "I'll use the shuttle again," I said. It worked well enough. She tilted her head slightly. "If you need a ride, I can take you." The offer landed differently than I expected, not because of what it was, but because of how easily it was given. "I don't want to put you out," I said. "You wouldn't be," she replied. "I'm already driving George to his appointments twice a week." She adjusted the grocery bag on the counter as she said it, almost without thinking. The top had shifted slightly, and I caught a glimpse of what was inside pill bottles, a folded sheet of paper, a bottle of water tucked to the side like it had its place. From somewhere deeper in the house, a faint cough carried through the hallway. Susan turned her head immediately, not startled, just aware. "I'm here," she called back, her voice steady like it was something she said often enough that it didn't need emphasis. There was no hesitation in it, no pause to decide what mattered more. Just a quiet response. I didn't say anything right away. I just stood there watching the way she reached for the bag again, checking it briefly before letting her hand rest on the counter. It felt practiced, like something they didn't even think about anymore. One more stop doesn't change much. "George," the friend asked. "My husband," she said gently. "He's been going through treatment for a few months now." I felt a small shift in my chest, something like recognition. "I didn't know," I said. "We don't talk about it much," she replied, "but it's part of our routine now." Routine. The word settled differently in this context. She described it simply appointments, medications, the way their days had rearranged themselves around something they hadn't planned for. There was no complaint in her voice, no sense of burden, just adaptation. "You learn what matters," she said at one point, almost as an aside. I looked at her, trying to understand exactly what she meant. "And what's that?" I asked. She smiled, not broadly, just enough to soften the lines around her eyes. "Showing up," she said, "even when it's inconvenient." The room went quiet for a moment, not uncomfortable, just still. I thought about the shuttle, the driver checking names off a list, the rows of patients sitting in silence, each of us carrying something we didn't quite share out loud. I thought about the waiting room, the couples, the families, the way people leaned into each other without needing to explain why. And then I thought about Lauren's kitchen, the granite countertops, the fruit bowl, the way she had said it. Independent. "It's good you have each other." I said, my voice steady. Susan nodded. "It makes a difference." That was the first time I understood it wasn't about what people said. It was about who showed up without being asked. She stood after a while, brushing her hands lightly against her pants, as if to signal the end of the visit. "I won't stay long," she said. "Just wanted to check in." "I appreciate it," I replied. And I did. At the door she paused. "Offer still stands," she said. "For the ride. I'll keep that in mind. Text me when you get home." She smiled once more, then stepped out into the morning light. I closed the door gently and stood there for a moment, my hand still on the handle. The house felt the same as it had before she arrived, but something in me didn't. I walked back into the kitchen and looked at the grocery bag she had left on the counter. Simple things, practical things, chosen without being asked. I reached out and touched the edge of the bag, then let my hand fall back to my side. For years I had told myself a story about what mattered, about what counted as enough, about what it meant to be present in someone's life. I had built that story slowly, piece by piece, until it felt like the only version that made sense. But now, standing in my own kitchen, I realized there might be another version running alongside it. One I hadn't been looking at closely enough. The kitchen stayed quiet after Susan left, but it wasn't the same quiet as before. It had edges now, questions that didn't move away when I turned from them. I stood there a moment longer, then reached for the chair at the table and sat down. The grocery bag remained on the counter unopened. I told myself I would put everything away in a minute. I didn't. Instead, I looked toward the hallway, the one that led to the small office I had used for years, back when work schedules and paperwork filled most of my days. I hadn't gone in there for anything important in a while, not since things had settled into something simpler, or what I thought was simpler. I stood and walked down the hall slower than usual, my hand brushing lightly against the wall as I moved. The door to the office was half open. I pushed it the rest of the way and stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of paper and something older time maybe. The desk sat where it always had a neat stack of folders aligned along one edge. I had always kept things organized. It was the only way to manage everything when there was too much to hold in your head at once. I pulled out the chair and sat, letting my eyes move across the surface of the desk. For a moment, I didn't reach for anything. I just looked. Then I opened the top drawer. Inside were the files I had kept for years. Bank statements, receipts, copies of checks, not because I expected to need them again, but because that was how I had learned to operate, keep records, keep track, stay ahead of whatever might come next. I took out the first folder. It was labeled simply Housing. I opened it, flipping through the pages slowly. There was the check photocopied, dated nearly 10 years earlier, $68,500, the down payment on Lauren and David's first house. I remembered the conversation that had led to it, the hesitation in her voice when she told me they were close but not quite there yet. "We'll figure it out," she had said. "We might just need more time." "You don't have to wait," I had replied. "I can help." And I had. I traced the date with my finger, then moved to the next document. Closing statements, property details, notes I had made to myself at the time, figures, timelines, reminders, temporary help. It hadn't felt like a sacrifice then. It had felt like progress. I set that folder aside and reached for another. Education. This one was thicker. Tuition payments, semester after semester. Partial amounts at first, then larger ones as costs increased. I remembered the late nights reviewing those bills, calculating what could be covered immediately and what would need to be managed over time. "You don't have to do all of it," Lauren had said once years ago. I know I had answered, and again I had meant it. I turned another page. Fees, textbooks, housing expenses, numbers that had once been part of a plan, something structured and purposeful. Now they looked different. Not wrong, just one-sided. I closed the folder more quickly than I intended and set it down beside the first. The third folder was labeled Household. This one held the smaller things, or what I had once considered smaller. Repairs, the roof that had needed replacing after a storm, the appliance that had broken unexpectedly, the SUV they had bought when Lauren told me the old car wasn't reliable enough for commuting. "I just need something safe," she had said. "You should have something safe," I had replied. So I had helped. The receipts were there, transfers dated and noted in my handwriting, each one tied to a moment I could still recall if I let myself. I leaned back in the chair, the folders spread across the desk in front of me. 3 categories: housing, education, household. I hadn't thought of them that way before. They had never needed to be grouped or named. They had simply been part of what I did, part of being her mother. I looked at the numbers again, letting them settle into something clearer. Not just individual amounts, but a pattern. A structure that had formed over years without ever being spoken out loud. Support, consistent, reliable, expected. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the folder I rarely looked at, Accounts. Inside were the details of my own finances, savings built over decades, the result of steady work, careful spending, and choices made quietly over time. There was more there than I needed for myself. That had always been the plan. Not excess, just enough to make sure she would never have to start from where I had. I closed the folder slowly, my hands resting on the cover. For a long time, I had understood all of this as one continuous story, one that moved in a single direction forward toward something better for her. I had never separated it into parts, never asked where it ended, or what exactly it had become along the way. I sat there for a while, the room still around me, the weight of the folders pressing into the surface of the desk. There was no sudden realization, no sharp moment where everything shifted at once, just a quiet clarity, a recognition that what I had been calling support might have looked very different from where she was standing, and that I had never asked the question out loud. The question didn't need to be said out loud for me to understand it. I closed the folders one by one, aligning them back into a neat stack the way I always had. The order mattered to me not because it changed anything, but because it gave shape to something that had been spread out for too long, and somewhere along the way assumed. I sat there a little longer, my hands resting lightly on the desk, feeling the grain of the wood beneath my fingertips. There wasn't anger in what I felt, not even disappointment in the way I might have expected. It was something steadier than that, a decision forming slowly. The next morning I called Margaret Collins. She had been my attorney for years, someone I trusted with things that required clarity more than emotion. Her voice on the phone was the same as always, measured, attentive. "Janice," she said, "it's been a while. How are you?" "I'd like to review my documents," I replied. "My will, and the power of attorney." There was a brief pause, not hesitation, just recognition of the shift in tone. "Of course," she said. "We can set something up this week." We met 2 days later in her office downtown. The space was familiar shelves of neatly arranged files, a desk cleared of anything unnecessary, light filtering in through tall windows that softened the edges of the room. She placed the documents in front of me, organized and clearly labeled. "Your current will names Lauren as the primary beneficiary," she said, "and she holds durable power of attorney for both financial and medical decisions." I nodded. I had signed those papers years ago at a time when the future seemed straightforward. "She's your only child," Margaret continued. "It's a standard structure, I understand," I said. She waited, giving me the space to continue. "I'd like to make some changes." There was no surprise in her expression, only attention. "What kind of changes?" "I want to revoke the power of attorney," I said. "Effective immediately." Margaret inclined her head slightly. "All right, we can prepare the revocation today. You'll need to notify any institutions where it's currently on file." "I will." "And the will?" she asked. I looked down at the document in front of me, the language formal, precise. It had been written to reflect a version of the future I had assumed would hold. "I want to restructure it," I said. "I don't want the assets transferred directly to Lauren." Margaret folded her hands on the desk. "How would you like them distributed?" I thought about Ethan. The way he had always looked at me, not out of obligation, but with a kind of easy presence. The way he asked questions and waited for the answers. The way he showed up even in small ways, without needing to be asked. "I want to establish a trust," I said, "in Ethan's name. Are you sure?" Margaret nodded once as if the direction made sense. "An irrevocable trust?" she asked. "Yes. We can structure it to provide for him over time," she said. "Education, living expenses, future needs. You can define the terms." "I'd like that," I replied. She made a few notes, then looked back up at me. "And Lauren?" There it was, the question that separated what had been from what would be. "I'll make a separate provision," I said after a moment. "A one-time amount, something reasonable." Margaret didn't press further. She didn't need to. We spent the next hour going through details, language conditions, timelines. It was all very precise, very controlled, the kind of process that leaves little room for ambiguity. When it was done, she printed the new documents and placed them in front of me. "Take your time," she said. I read through each page carefully, not because I doubted the structure, but because I wanted to be certain of the choice itself. When I signed, my hand didn't shake. Margaret witnessed the signatures, then gathered the papers into a clean folder. "I'll file these today," she said, "and prepare the notices for the power of attorney revocation." "Thank you." As I stood to leave, she added, "If you need anything else, any adjustments, we can revisit this at any time." I nodded. "I appreciate that." Outside, the air felt clearer than it had in days. There was no sense of finality in what I had done, No dramatic shift, no immediate consequence. Just a quiet realignment. Something that had been leaning too far in one direction brought back into balance. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, my hands resting on the steering wheel. For years I had structured everything around a single assumption that what I gave would always be understood in the way I intended it. For the first time, I was defining those terms for myself. The house felt different once the papers were signed. Not because anything had changed physically, the same furniture, the same photographs, the same quiet corners that had held years of ordinary days, but because I no longer saw it as something permanent. It was no longer the place everything led back to. It was simply a place I had lived. I walked through each room slowly over the next few days, not with nostalgia, but with a kind of careful attention. The kitchen where so much of our life had unfolded in small, unremarkable ways. The living room where I had waited for calls for visits for time that never quite aligned the way I expected it to. I opened closets, drawers, cabinets, sorting, deciding what mattered enough to take what could be let go without losing anything essential. It wasn't difficult. That surprised me. I called a realtor the following week, James Walker, someone local who knew the area well. He came by that afternoon, professional and efficient, walking through the house with a practiced eye. "It's in good condition," he said, making notes on a tablet. "Location's strong. We should be able to list this at around $735. I nodded. "That's fine." He glanced at me briefly. "Any urgency on your end?" "No," I said. Then after a pause, "But I'd like it handled cleanly." "Of course." The listing went up within days. There were showings almost immediately. People moving through the rooms I had just moved through myself, seeing possibilities I was no longer attached to. I stepped out during those times, letting the process unfold without me standing in the middle of it. The offer came faster than I expected, full asking price. James called to confirm. "We can close within 30 days if you're ready." "I am," I said. The paperwork followed signatures, confirmations, the steady sequence of steps that turn a decision into something final. I didn't tell Lauren, not at first. There wasn't a reason to not until things were settled. That's what I told myself. But if I was being honest, it was something else. I wanted to see what would happen when the structure I had maintained quietly for so long shifted without explanation. The call came 3 days after the sale was finalized. I was in the kitchen rinsing a cup when my phone rang. Lauren's name lit up the screen. I dried my hands on a towel and answered. "Hi," I said. "What's going on?" she asked immediately. No greeting, no pause. I leaned slightly against the counter. "What do you mean I just got a call from the bank?" she said, her voice tight. "They said the power of attorney is no longer active, and something about account access being changed." "Did you do that?" "Yes," I said. There was a brief silence on the other end. Not long, but enough to register. "Why?" she asked. The question came quickly, but there was something under it. Not concern, not confusion in the way I might have expected. Disruption. I reviewed my documents, I said. It made sense to update them. Without telling me, she pressed. "I'm telling you now. That's not the same thing, Mom." I let the words sit for a moment before responding. "No, it isn't." Another pause. I could hear movement on her end, maybe pacing, maybe just shifting the phone from one hand to the other, and the account she asked, "I can't see anything anymore." "I've reorganized them," I said, "for my own management, for your own." She stopped herself, then started again. "Mom, I've been helping you with that. That's why we set it up in the first place. I remember." "Then why would you change it?" The question lingered longer this time. I could have answered it in a dozen different ways. Explained the reasoning, walked her through the steps, the structure, the logic of it. Instead, I chose something simpler. "Because I can manage it myself," I said. Her exhale was sharp, controlled. "This doesn't make sense. You're overreacting. It does to me." There was another shift in the tone of her voice, then something tightening. "Is this about the other day?" she asked. "The appointment," I didn't respond immediately. "Mom," she continued, "if this is about me not driving you, I already told you we had plans. You said you understood." "I did," I said. "Then why does this feel like you're punishing me?" The word landed between us heavier than anything she had said so far. I'm not punishing you, I replied. Then what are you doing? I looked out toward the window, the same view I had seen every day for years now, already beginning to feel less permanent. I'm making decisions, I said quietly. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was different, less controlled. We need to talk about this in person. I nodded even though she couldn't see it. All right. When she asked, whenever you're available. I'll come by this weekend, she said quickly. We'll figure this out. Figure this out. I held on to the phrase for a moment. Okay, I said. We ended the call without saying goodbye. For the first time, the silence between us didn't feel temporary. It felt like something that had been there for a long time. I set the phone down on the counter and stood there for a while, listening to the quiet settle back into the room. The house, for the first time, felt like something I was already leaving behind. Lauren arrived on Saturday afternoon. She didn't knock right away. I saw her car pull into the driveway through the front window, watched her sit there for a few seconds before stepping out. When she finally came to the door, the knock was firmer than Susan's had been days earlier, more certain, less careful. I opened it before she knocked a second time. Hi, I said. She looked past me briefly, as if checking whether anything had changed inside the house. Can I come in? Of course. She walked in without waiting for me to move far, her steps quick, purposeful. She didn't sit. Instead, she turned to face me in the middle of the living room, her arms folded lightly across her chest. Okay, she said. What is going on? I stayed where I was near the doorway, giving her the space she seemed to need. I told you, I said. I updated my documents. I reorganized my accounts. That's not an explanation, she replied. That's just what you did. I'm asking why. Her voice wasn't raised, but it carried something sharper now, frustration maybe, or something closer to disbelief. I took a slow breath, choosing my words carefully. Because I needed things to be clear, I said, for myself, clear about what she asked. Mom, I've been helping you. That's why we set up the power of attorney in the first place. You asked me to be involved. I remember. Then why shut me out now? The question hung there. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked at her, really looked at her, the way she stood steady and certain, waiting for something that would make sense within the structure she was used to. This isn't about shutting you out, I said finally. It's about understanding where I stand. Her brow tightened slightly. What does that even mean? I let the silence stretch for a second, not to avoid the answer, but to let it settle before I gave it. It means I said that I realized something recently, about how things have been between us. She shifted her weight, her arms still crossed. And I can't keep pretending it's something it's not. There was a flicker of something in her expression, then uncertainty maybe, or resistance. You're making this sound bigger than it is, she said. It was one situation, one appointment. It wasn't just that I replied. She opened her mouth to respond, then stopped. I didn't fill the silence for her this time. After a moment, she exhaled the tension in her shoulders, easing just slightly. Then what is it? She asked, quieter now. I thought about the shuttle, the waiting room. Susan's voice, simple and steady, showing up even when it's inconvenient. It's a pattern, I said. One I didn't name for a long time. She looked at me, searching for something to push back against, something concrete. That's not fair, she said. I have a life, responsibilities. I can't always drop everything. I'm not asking you to, I said. Then what are you saying? I met her eyes. I'm saying I understand that now. The words landed differently than anything else I had said. She stared at me, confusion giving way to something more unsettled. So you're just, what? Changing everything because of that? She asked. I'm making decisions based on what is not what I thought it was, I said. And the will, she pressed. The trust, you didn't even tell me. I made provisions for you, I said, but I chose to structure things differently. Her expression tightened again. For Ethan? Yes. She let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but without humor. So that's it. You just decide I'm not, responsible enough, good enough, that's not what this is about. Then explain it to me, she said, her voice rising slightly despite herself, because from where I'm standing it feels like you're taking everything I've done and just cutting me out. I held her gaze steady. I'm not cutting you out, I said. I'm stepping back. The distinction seemed to catch her off guard. For years I gave without thinking about where it ended. I didn't need anything in return, but I also didn't notice what wasn't there. She didn't interrupt this time. I'm not angry with you, I added. And I'm not trying to punish you. Then why does it feel like that? She asked, her voice quieter again. Because something changed, I said, and I chose not to ignore it. The room fell still. She looked away first, her arms lowering slightly as she exhaled. I didn't realize. She started, then stopped. I didn't ask her to finish. We stood there for a while, the conversation no longer sharp, but not resolved either, just settled into something that didn't need to be pushed further in that moment. I sold the house, I said after a pause. Her head turned back quickly. You what? It's done? I replied. I'll be moving soon. To where? A smaller place. Assisted living. She blinked, the information rearranging itself in her mind. You're serious? I am. Another silence, different this time. And Ethan? She asked after a moment. I'd like him to visit, I said. If he wants to. She nodded slowly, as if still catching up to everything that had already happened. I'll talk to him, she said. Thank you. She didn't stay much longer. There wasn't anything left to say that would change what had already been set in motion. When she left, it was quieter than when she arrived. The house felt even more like a place in transition. A few weeks later, I moved into Brookdale. It was smaller, yes, simpler, but there was something steady about it. People came and went, but not in a way that felt distant. There were routines again, conversations that didn't have to be scheduled weeks in advance. Ethan visited the following Sunday. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking around, then at me. This is nice, he said. It is, I agreed. He sat across from me, leaning forward slightly. Mom told me some of what's going on. I thought she might. He nodded, then hesitated. Are you okay? I am, I said. He studied my face for a second, as if checking for something deeper. Then he relaxed just a little. We talked for a while about school, about small things, about nothing in particular, the kind of conversation that doesn't need to carry weight to matter. When he left, he hugged me without hesitation. I'll come back next week, he said. Text me when you get home. I'd like that. After he was gone, I sat by the window in my new room watching the late afternoon light settle over the courtyard. It wasn't the same view I had before, but it didn't need to be. Sometimes what changes isn't what you give, but what you finally allow yourself to see. If you were in my place, would you have kept things the way they were, or made the same choice I did? I'd really like to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, you can support the channel by liking, sharing, or subscribing. I used to think holding everything together was the same as being part of it.